In a world obsessed with jets that can disappear from radar faster than your ex's texts, there's one plane that proudly said, "Radar? I don't need no stinking radar." Meet the A-1 Skyraider, basically the warplane equivalent of your grandpa showing up to a rave wearing combat boots and still out dancing everyone. It's loud, it's slow, it's ugly as sin, and it's the reason bad guys learned that being stubborn pays off. This wasn't just some prop plane that accidentally wandered into the jet age. This was a calculated middle finger to the entire concept of faster is better. While everyone else was chasing Mach numbers like Pokemon cards, the Skyraider was proving that sometimes you need a flying crowbar more than a flying bullet. And if that sounds familiar, it's because decades later, the Air Force would figure out the same lesson when they built the A-10 Warthog, the Skyraider's spiritual successor, and the only aircraft mean enough to be its grandson. Ed Heinemann, the twisted genius behind the A-4 Skyhawk, designed this beast at Douglas Aircraft Company. The Navy's brief was simple: make it carry everything, make it tough as nails, and make it simple enough that a mechanic with a hangover can fix it with a wrench and creative swearing. Heinemann delivered a plane that looked like a pickup truck with wings and the temperament of a honey badger. The first prototype flew March 18, 1945, powered by a Wright R3350 engine, the same power plant that pushed B-29s to Japan. With over 2,000 horsepower available and later variants pushing even more power, this engine was destined to carry every conceivable form of conventional death to anyone unlucky enough to be downrange. The specs tell the story of practical design over impressive statistics. 38 feet 10 inches long, 50 feet 9 inches wingspan, max speed of 318 miles per hour, range of 3,000 miles, combat radius of 460 miles, empty weight of 11,968 pounds, maximum takeoff weight approaching 25,000 pounds in some configurations, and 15 hardpoints that could carry massive external loads, turning a significant portion of the aircraft's weight into pure violence. While the Navy was perfecting their flying crowbar, the Air Force was trying to figure out what to do with jets. The F-84 Thunderjet was fast at 587 miles per hour, but it could only carry 4,000 pounds of ordnance and had the loiter time of a mayfly with ADHD. The F-86 Sabre was beautiful and could dogfight, but try using it for close air support and you'd get about as much precision as a drunk dart player. Meanwhile, the Skyraider was proving that sometimes the tortoise really does beat the hare, especially when the tortoise is carrying enough explosives to level a small town. The Wright R3550 wasn't just big. It was 18 cylinders of fury that B-29 crews called the engine from hell, because it loved catching fire more than a teenager loves TikTok. The Skyraider somehow tamed this mechanical beast with better cooling, and probably some strongly worded conversations about proper behavior. When that four-bladed Hamilton Standard prop spun up, it didn't push air, it grabbed chunks of atmosphere and hurled them backward with the enthusiasm of a drunk sailor in a bar fight. The sound was unmistakable, a deep, throaty roar announcing that death was coming, and it was taking its sweet time getting there. The Skyraider's first blood came in Korea, where it established itself as the plane you called when you absolutely, positively needed something destroyed overnight. While jets were learning how to be jets, dealing with flameouts and acting like prima donnas, the Skyraider was doing the dirty work. Navy pilots were launching these beasts off aircraft carriers and essentially launching school buses with wings off floating runways in the middle of the ocean. The tactical employment was beautifully simple. Find the enemy, fly low enough to count their facial hair, then drop enough explosives to rearrange the local geography. Korean war pilots discovered that the Skyraider could carry more ordnance than many World War II bombers. A single-engine, single-seat aircraft outgunning multi-engine strategic bombers that required entire crews. Lieutenant Commander William Ecker flew so low during one bridge strike that he came back with telephone wires wrapped around his landing gear. That's not flying, that's aggressive landscaping with wings. The contrast with its contemporaries was stark. The Navy's F-9F Panther could hit 579 miles per hour but carried only 3,000 pounds of ordnance, with a combat radius of just 180 miles. The Air Force's F-80 Shooting Star was even worse for ground attack. Fast enough to impress at air shows, useless for the grunt work of war. The Skyraider was the blue-collar worker showing up the MBA graduates, proving that sometimes experience and persistence matter more than a fancy resume. 15 hardpoints could accommodate a mind-boggling variety of death. 500-pound bombs, napalm, rocket pods, gun pods, torpedoes, depth charges, and even nuclear weapons for really special occasions. With the ability to carry thousands of pounds of external ordnance, pilots routinely push these things to their absolute limits, essentially flying bombs with delusions of being aircraft. The wing structure was massively overbuilt with thick spars and heavy-duty ribs that could handle forces that would snap lesser aircraft in half. The engineering was brilliantly simple. Build it strong enough that it won't break, then build it stronger. But here's the genius. The Skyraider could carry this ridiculous load and still loiter for hours. While jets arrived with barely enough fuel for one pass, the Skyraider could set up a lawn chair, make coffee, and spend the afternoon methodically destroying everything in sight. It was the difference between a drive-by shooting and a siege, and the Skyraider preferred the siege. If the A-1 were a person, it'd be the guy who walks through a meteor shower, wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying a beer in each hand. Titanium plating around the cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, and structure that could absorb damage that would turn other aircraft into confetti. The stories are legendary. Pilots would return from missions with their aircraft looking like they went through a cheese grater, operated by someone with anger management issues, but they flew home like nothing happened. Another pilot survived a crash landing after his Skyraider absorbed so much damage that investigators said it was mechanically impossible for it to have remained airborne. But somehow it stayed in the air long enough to get him close to friendly forces. Because the Skyraider didn't believe in physics, it just believed in getting the job done. It was like watching a cartoon character run off a cliff and only fall when they look down. If you were a grunt pinned down in Vietnam and heard that big radial engine rumble overhead, you knew salvation had arrived. Jets couldn't stick around. They were like that friend who shows up to help you move but can only stay for 5 minutes. The Skyraider was the annoying fly that wouldn't quit, circling for hours and dropping bombs within feet of friendly troops with surgical precision that would make a neurosurgeon jealous. The key wasn't just firepower, it was persistence. Ground troops developed religious devotion to Skyraider pilots. These guys would show up in impossible weather, fly through intense ground fire, and stay on station until every last enemy position was neutralized. They were the air support equivalent of that one friend who actually returns your calls. The most famous role was the Sandy mission, providing cover for combat search and rescue. When an American pilot got shot down, Skyraiders would arrive first, suppress enemy fire, and coordinate rescue operations until helicopters could extract the downed pilot. Sandy missions were legalized suicide, flying low and slow over heavily defended territory, deliberately drawing fire to locate enemy positions, then systematically destroying them. The most famous Sandy mission lasted 11 days in 1972, with Skyraider pilots flying continuous missions through SAMs, anti-aircraft artillery, and small arms fire to rescue Lieutenant Colonel Isel Hambleton. 11 days. That's dedication that makes marriage vows look casual. Vietnam was where the Skyraider earned its reputation as the most effective close air support aircraft ever built. While jets struggled with dense jungle and limited loiter time, the Skyraider thrived in conditions that would ground lesser aircraft. This was where the fundamental difference between the Skyraider and its contemporaries became crystal clear. The F-105 Thunderchief could carry 14,000 pounds of ordnance, but it had to drop it all in one pass at 600 miles per hour. Precision was optional, destruction was guaranteed. The Skyraider could carry thousands of pounds of ordnance and place each bomb exactly where it needed to go, then stick around to see if you needed anything else destroyed. When the Army finally got the A-1 Cobra helicopter in 1967, they thought they'd found the perfect close air support platform. The Cobra was fast for a helicopter, well-armed, and could hover, but it could only carry 1,800 pounds of ordnance and had about the same survivability as a paper airplane in a hurricane. The Skyraider looked at the Cobra's 2.75-inch rockets and 20mm cannon and said, "That's cute," then proceeded to carry significantly more payload while absorbing damage that would turn a helicopter into scrap metal. It was like bringing a knife to a gunfight, except the knife was actually a flying artillery battery. During Operation Rolling Thunder, Skyraiders flew thousands of sorties against North Vietnamese supply lines. While jets handled high-priority targets, Skyraiders did the unglamorous work of destroying truck convoys, bridges, and supply depots with precision impossible from 20,000 feet. They were the janitors of warfare, not glamorous, but absolutely essential. The Skyraiders' approach to ground attack was fundamentally different from anything else in the sky. The F-4 Phantom II was the era's premier fighter bomber, capable of Mach 2.2 and carrying 18,000 pounds of ordnance. But the Phantom was like a hurricane, devastating, fast, and gone before you knew what hit you. The Skyraider was more like a persistent thunderstorm, rumbling overhead for hours, methodically destroying everything that needed destroying. The Phantom needed a runway. The Skyraider could operate from aircraft carriers. The Phantom needed perfect weather. The Skyraider flew in conditions that would ground commercial airlines. The Skyraider's engineering was purposeful brutality. Multi-spar wing design with massive ribs distributed load across the entire structure. Battle damage to one area wouldn't compromise the whole wing. Triple redundant hydraulics with manual backups meant pilots could still control the aircraft even after catastrophic system failures. The cockpit design optimized combat effectiveness. Pilots sat high for excellent visibility. Instruments logically arranged, weapons controls within easy reach. Even the ejection seat was armored, though most pilots preferred riding the aircraft down rather than trusting parachutes over enemy territory. Now, if all this sounds familiar, it's because the Air Force was taking notes. Decades later, they'd create the A-10 Warthog, the Skyraider's spiritual successor, and the only aircraft worthy of carrying on the family tradition of being ridiculously overarmed and proudly ugly. The A-10 took the Skyraider's philosophy and cranked it up to 11, wrapping an airplane around the GAU-8 Avenger cannon and calling it close air support. Where the Skyraider was stubborn, the A-10 was downright obstinate. Where the Skyraider was tough, the A-10 was practically indestructible. But here's where it gets bittersweet. The A-10, like its grandfather before it, is being forced into retirement. The Air Force wants to replace it with the F-35 Lightning II, a multi-role fighter that can do everything except the one thing the A-10 does best: loiter over a battlefield and provide sustained, accurate close air support. It's like replacing a sledgehammer with a smartphone because the smartphone can also make calls. Sure, it's more advanced, but try using it to drive a railroad spike. The A-10's retirement represents the same philosophical shift that killed the Skyraider. The belief that newer and more technologically advanced automatically means better. The F-35 can go supersonic, has stealth capabilities, and costs roughly the same as a small country's GDP. The A-10 can fly low, hit hard, and survive damage that would turn other aircraft into expensive scrap metal. In a world increasingly focused on counterinsurgency and close air support, we're trading the perfect tool for the job for the Swiss Army knife of fighter jets. Both aircraft shared the same DNA. They were built by people who understood that sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. The Skyraider and A-10 were honest aircraft. They didn't pretend to be something they weren't. They were flying tanks designed to support ground troops, and they did it better than anything before or since. Even in 1982, Argentine Skyraiders were proving their worth during the Falklands War. While the world watched Harriers and Exocet missiles, these ancient prop planes quietly flew close air support with the same effectiveness they'd shown in Vietnam. The deployment highlighted the Skyraider's greatest advantage: operational simplicity. While jets required complex maintenance and specialized support, the Skyraider needed just basic mechanics, simple tools, and aviation gasoline. You could maintain a Skyraider with a toolbox and determination. Modern fighters require computer diagnostics and a PhD in electrical engineering. Today's light attack aircraft, the A-29 Super Tucano, AT-6 Wolverine, are chasing the Skyraider's ghost. Military planners finally realized what Skyraider pilots always knew. Sometimes you don't need a multi-million-dollar stealth fighter to kill a guy with an AK-47. The Air Force's light attack experiment was essentially an attempt to recreate Skyraider capabilities with modern technology. But modern aircraft can't replicate the intimidation factor. When that big radial fired up, everyone knew something serious was about to happen. It was the difference between a polite knock and someone kicking down your door. In a strange way, the B-1 Lancer represents the modern evolution of the Skyraider's mission philosophy, just scaled up to strategic levels. Like the Skyraider, the B-1 was built to carry massive payloads over long distances and loiter over target areas. The B-1 can carry 125,000 pounds of ordnance, about 20 times what a Skyraider could lift. But the core concept is identical. Show up with overwhelming firepower and stay until the job is done. The B-1 in Afghanistan was essentially a strategic Skyraider, orbiting at 30,000 feet and dropping precision-guided munitions on request. Both aircraft understood that sometimes persistence matters more than speed, and overwhelming capability matters more than technological sophistication. Skyraider pilots weren't glamorous fighter jocks. They were blue-collar heroes who showed up for work and quietly won wars. Many World War II veterans who understood the value of precise, low-altitude attacks and weren't impressed by jet speed and technology. They were the kind of guys who fixed their own cars and built their own furniture. Practical men flying a practical aircraft. Training was extensive and realistic. All weather conditions, day and night, from treetop level to 20,000 feet. But the most important training was learning to think like ground troops, understanding how battles developed and how to provide effective air support. The Skyraider's career officially ended in 1973, not because of combat ineffectiveness but changing military priorities. The Air Force wanted an all-jet force for logistics and perception. Propeller aircraft seemed obsolete regardless of capability. It was like forcing every restaurant to serve only molecular gastronomy because regular food looked too simple. The irony, many conflicts that followed were exactly the wars where Skyraiders would have been most effective. Low-intensity conflicts in Central America, Africa, and the Middle East were perfect for persistent, cost-effective close air support. The A-1 Skyraider was never the fastest, prettiest, or most advanced aircraft in the sky, but it was the most honest, straightforward machine built to do a specific job better than anything else. The aircraft's legacy isn't just bridges destroyed or pilots rescued, it's proof that effective military equipment doesn't have to be complicated or expensive. It just has to work when needed most. The ghost of the Skyraider still haunts modern aviation, whispering uncomfortable truths about simplicity over sophistication, persistence over speed, and honest capability over flashy technology. In a world obsessed with stealth and Mach numbers, the Skyraider reminds us there's always a place for the loud, the stubborn, and the ridiculously overarmed. As we watch the A-10 taxi toward its final sunset, we're not just losing an aircraft. We're losing a philosophy that understood that sometimes the best answer to a complex problem is a simple solution delivered with overwhelming force and unshakable determination. The Skyraider proved that you don't need to be the smartest guy in the room if you're the most reliable. You don't need to be the fastest if you're the most persistent. And you don't need to be the prettiest if you're the most effective. In an era of disposable everything, the Skyraider was built to last, designed to fight, and determined to win. It was ugly, it was loud, and it was absolutely, undeniably badass. This is Steel Mallard reminding you that sometimes the best things in life are loud, stubborn, and ridiculously overarmed. So smash that like button and subscribe for more beautiful disasters of military technology.